The same goes for people and for men. All of time and history literally revolve around these two great kings, two men that are exact polar opposites one for the other. One is the king of righteousness, the father of truth. He is the one man, the standard of good by which all other men are compared, and this is Messiah. And the other one is the son of perdition. He's the schemer of schemers, the master of illusion, the perverter of truth, and the father of a lie. And his name is Adolf Hitler. Now, these are the two most famous men in history. And all of time and history literally revolve around these two men and their manifestations in flesh. So today we're going to talk about how this mean old devil has literally stolen the entire earth right before our very eyes, as it were, in secret. See, Hitler had a three-pronged plan of world domination that was completely foolproof. Step one of his plan called for the secret development of a hydrogen bomb to set on top of his V-1 rocket. The V-1 rocket was a manned rocket. It was capable of taking a 2,000-pound warhead over 125 miles into the atmosphere. Okay? Now, there was a man named Mr. Teller. He's accredited as being the father of the hydrogen bomb, and he was a member of the Manhattan Project. Now, what all of the top physicists had in common, who pioneered the Manhattan Project, was that each and every one of these top scientists studied physics at the Wilhelm Institute of Technology in the 1920s. And Adolf Hitler kicked everyone of them out of the country, including Mr. Einstein and Mr. Teller, all out of Germany in the 1930s, because they were a security breach to his program due to their racial impurity. Okay. Now, Mr. Teller, he described the hydrogen bomb as a mathematical formula for the end of the world, explaining that a hydrogen implosion at critical mass, that the temperature, the heat, the energy released from such an implosion would produce a flash point of temperature that would be 7 times hotter than the surface temperature of the sun. And that he theorized that if you were to ignite such a weapon in the upper atmosphere where the nitrogen resides around the earth, that such an implosion would set up a chain reaction in the upper atmosphere that would literally set all the nitrogen itself on fire, thereby cinderizing the entire atmosphere of the earth and turning it black like sackcloth, making it impossible for the earth's, the light of the sun to reach the surface of this world, thereby causing extinction, an end to all life. That's where you get the name Prince of Darkness, because whoever owned or controlled such a weapon, such a god of forces, as described by Daniel the prophet, would have power to bring eternal darkness upon the face of the whole earth that would never go away. I believe that Mr. Hitler perfected such a weapon in the early 1930s, and that he used that weapon to blackmail the leaders of the world into swearing unquestionable devotion to him and his plan to build a new world order. Step 2 of the plan called for the visible destruction of all Axis armed forces. Okay? And then, because Hitler understood and knew at the time, in the 1930s, that the people of the United States in particular, and England and France and of the free world, that the people were not ready to receive and accept him as total rule over the earth. The people would have rebelled. If he had openly shown this weapon to the world through newsreels and through the media of that day, and people of the world would have stood up in defiance of him, and he would have been forced to use the weapon. Okay? So step 2 called for the visible destruction of all Axis armed forces. It says in Daniel that he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land and stumble and be not found. That pretty much describes what happened in Berlin at the end of the war with Hitler and his disappearance from the stage of the earth. And then step 3 called for the invisible preservation of all Nazi intelligence resources. In 1945, when Berlin fell to the Allies, Hitler had over 250,000 intelligence agents in the field worldwide. He had created the largest global intelligence apparatus in the history of mankind, and it's well documented that Hitler's intelligence community survived the demise of his state government and continued to function independent of any government throughout the entire Cold War era. And the little bits and pieces and cells of his intelligence apparatus become the number one prize, the most sought after prize between the East and the West throughout the entire Cold War era. And whenever the United States, Great Britain, France, or Russia, whenever we would detect and find and capture a little bit or piece of his functioning intelligence community out there in the field, in the world, we would take that whole program back to our nation, and those studies and those programs were continued under a new flag. And nothing really ever stopped. It was just continued. Then when Japan surrendered and at the end of the war, the world celebrated the victory that we had defeated the Axis armed forces. During that time of great celebration, the United States government quietly recalled all of its own intelligence operatives and dismissed them on the GI Bill with a pat on the back and a job well done, and sent them home to have a good life and civilian life in America. And the United States government also dismantled and disbanded and abolished their own intelligence apparatus, the OSS, the Office of Selective Services. And they did away with their own intelligence apparatus, the OSS. The OSS was the intelligence apparatus of the United States Armed Forces during the Second World War. They abolished that and did away with it and formed a brand new thing called the Central Intelligence Department, which was later named the CIA. Okay? Well, this was Hitler's plan all along, because in this manner, at the same time, when at the end of the war, the United States government, through Operation Paperclip and other secret covert operations, the United States government opened its arms wide to embrace all the most elite Nazi intelligence agents that they could find in the field worldwide, were embraced and incorporated right into the ranks of the Central Intelligence Department when it was formed. And that was Hitler's plan all along, because in this manner he was able to place his most intelligent officers right into the ranks of the United States government directly at the end of the war. They just switched hats with our boys at the end of the war. And then those Nazi intelligence agents in the Central Intelligence Department were permitted to use that agency as a vehicle to capture the executive branch of government here in the United States directly at the end of the Second World War. And that's been pretty much game over, okay? And we've been under worldwide Nazi occupation ever since. In 1947, those Nazis in the Central Intelligence Department who had captured the executive branch of government here in the United States, they changed the name of the department to the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, so as to signal to their counterparts all over the world that they had been completely successful in overthrowing and subverting and subduing the United States government. And yes, we have been under worldwide Nazi occupation ever since. From that time on, they began to import hard drugs and narcotics through the Central Intelligence Agency into the United States from Southeast Asia and South America. And they would give these hard drugs and narcotics to the Italian crime families in the inner cities, New York, Chicago, Detroit, LA. And those drugs were then distributed to Negroes, the people of color, back in our segregated United States of the 1940s. And that money was then donated to the Roman Catholic Church in America, and the money was then redeemed for gold, because back in the 1940s, our money was redeemable in lawful money. The United States dollar was redeemable in lawful money. And then that lawful money, that hard currency, was spirited out of the country into the Bank of Rome, into the coffer of Rome, and used to rebuild the New World Order. So that's exactly what has happened. That's exactly how he did it, okay? Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the flat earth theory. Now see, Hitler is also he's the father of jet propulsion, atomic weapons. The first atom ever split was in 1934 in Berlin, Germany. That was the first chain reaction that they had ever obtained in the modern age. Also jet propulsion, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, solid rocket boosters, stealth technology. He was the first politician to ever use radio as an effective tool in a major political campaign. That's where you get the Prince of the Power of the Air. The World Book Encyclopedia described him as the hypnotist of the masses, saying that he was the greatest orator of all time. This is the Pied Piper. He is the devil in the flesh, come to steal the whole earth right before our very eyes, as it were in secret. And Adolf Hitler is also the father of genetic research and cloning. The first animal ever cloned was a frog in 1934 in Nazi Germany at the Wilhelm Institute of Technology. Today we see the Federal Republic of Germany, which oddly enough spells frog. See, I believe in my heart that just like Yeshua HaNazari is raised from the grave through the natural power of God, which is love, that Hitler, through the perversion of medical technology, that he has discovered a way to cheat death, to prolong his life, a way to live twice. That he has actually literally been born again just like Christ, only by an alternative means. They reincarnated him. He was cloned. You see, what did Yeshua say to Nicodemus? He said, Nicodemus, if you cannot understand the things that men do on earth, how can you refer the things that I refer to? Because Nicodemus asked him, said, how can a man be born again? Can he enter into his mother's womb the second time and be born again when he is old? And Jesus answered and said, Nicodemus, if you cannot understand the things that men do on earth, the sciences that men do on earth, then how can you understand the things that God alone does? Okay? So that's the plan, and that's what's been going on in the world stage. See, Mr. Hitler fancies himself to be a religious leader. To him, it's not a political battle at all. It's a religious thing. He wants the hearts and souls of men. And he's been able to prepare the people and the generations of the people to pull them away from our God and to introduce us to the pornography, the bestiality, the homosexuality, the drugs, the sex, the rock and roll, and the things that we hold so dear in the United States and throughout the Western world, to pull our minds and our hearts away from our God to such an extent to where he is able to take that place. That's why they have been teaching us all about the evolution. That's why they've been teaching us everything contrariwise to the God of creation that they can. Now, Hitler's rockets discovered the dome of the flat earth in the 1930s. And Hitler, being an acute student of the occult, realized that the ancient model of the flat earth covered with a clear dome was accurate. So he also realized that there was a thing called the Gate of the South below Argentina and what we call Antarctica. Now, Antarctica is not a small or not a continent at the bottom of the globe ball Earth. It is a circumference ring. It is a circle of the Earth. It's a 60,000-mile circumference. It's a wall, a 200-foot wall of ice that goes around the whole circle of the Earth. And if you go south of Argentina to the uttermost, southernmost parts of the flat Earth map, you will find the Gate of the South. There is a gate that goes through the dome into other districts. He went down in 1937, 1938. He led the largest Antarctic expedition in the history of man to Antarctica, where he claimed he brought planes and photograph equipment and maps and surveys, and he laid claim to a large piece of land in there called New Swabenland, where he built a thing called Nazi Base 211. And if you research and Google these things, I believe that you're going to find a lot of evidence that Mr. Hitler sequestered himself and his top scientists down in New Swabenland from the 1940s to today at present time, where they have been working on manufacturing next generation weapons for the next war that's about to cut loose. And it's all over this little piece of land where I'm standing right now in Jerusalem. because he wants to sit in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So if you want to know who the devil is who steals the whole earth, it's Mr. Hitler. And if you've got any questions, I'd be the guy to answer them, because I know the story from the beginning to the end, and I know it probably better than anyone on earth. So I love you, and I'll be glad to hear what you got to say about this video. Thank you. Aloha.